Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Israel and Iran stop shooting for now. Welcome to the Monday edition as markets cheer the direction of headlines today from the Middle East after President Trump demanded an end to fighting amid a fragile ceasefire. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, it was the first time Iran fired ballistic missiles at Israel since the ceasefire. The stopping of the fighting, at least for now, seems to be giving markets a lift.
Well, that is certainly so. A rebound in technology stocks is helping the overall market as well. But you're right, it is a stoppage of a ceasefire break, it seems, at least for now. Though Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in a video statement, did say that while Israel is currently halting its attacks on Iran, it will respond with great force if Iran attacks it again. It just underscores how fragile, to your point, all of this remains, even as President Trump contends that he still thinks Iran is desperate for a deal, and that process can move forward if there is no, what did he call it, stupidity?
Or ignorance, I think that's right. Yeah. So it's a shooting ceasefire still. We survived another weekend with shots fired. The ceasefire, though, technically remains in place, and the markets have been clawing back a bit today, Kailey. But there are big questions now that the Houthis are also banning, apparently, Israeli ships from the Red Sea about how long this can last. Yeah,
the market right now, though, does appear that it's looking through at least the latest tensions, maybe seizing to the idea that for now the shooting ceasefire seems to be going back to just more of a ceasefire. But of course, they also have other narratives to contend with. As I mentioned, you're seeing a rebound in tech. It'll be interesting to see if Apple can fuel that further, as the keynote at the Worldwide Developers Conference is happening at this hour. This is going to be the AI one. And so we're going to check in with Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow in just a minute. But first, let's check in with Charlie Pellet on the overall markets up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe and Kailey. Happy Monday. We got Apple shares up now by 2%. The Dow just turning negative. Do want to begin, though, with crude oil. You guys were discussing the so-called shooting ceasefire. Oil remains higher. It is not pulling back. West Texas Intermediate crude, $91.25 a barrel. It is up by 0.8%. Barrel of Brent also higher, up by 1.4%. $94.39 for a barrel of Brent crude. So right now, we've got crude oil trading higher. The Dow turning lower, down 24 now, drop there of 0.1%. We are seeing dip buyers come in, especially for tech names. The S&P up 43 now, up 0.6%. NASDAQ is advancing by 1.3%. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 1.9%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index up by about 0.3%. We are seeing a surge for the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's Semiconductor Stock Index, also known as the SOX, up now by 6.2%. The VIX holding above 18 with a 10-year at 4.55%. The 2-year 4.15%. The 30-year 5.02%. Kailey mentioned the interest in tech names. This after NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang called global tech stocks the sell-off that began last week a buying opportunity, saying the build-out of AI has just begun. NVIDIA shares, they're up now by 1.5%. And speaking of tech, Alphabet's Google recently placed an order with Intel to manufacture more than 3 million of its specialized AI chips in 2028. That according to the information. Intel up 11.4%. Alphabet down by 1.9%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Charlie, we'll be back in about 20 minutes with another read on the markets. It has begun. We start this hour in Cupertino, where the latest WWDC is just getting underway. And in fact, it is Tim Cook's last, which has a lot of people looking closely. But it's not only because of the turnover at the top. It's because Apple is preparing to seize onto AI and do it a bit more effectively than it has in times past. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow joins us right now, of course, the co-host of Bloomberg Tech, and is actually at the Apple plant in Cupertino, where the headlines are about to start flying. Ed, if you follow the conventional wisdom, this is a seminal moment in the emergence of this technology because Apple already has hardware in all of our hands. It's just a matter of getting the software to work. What can you tell us?
Yeah, the headline will be, per Bloomberg's reporting, a standalone Siri app that takes Siri from being a feature to a destination, right? Something akin to ChatGPT or the Claude app, where you are capable of conducting multi-step tasks, something more agentic. Bloomberg's reported that it will be Google's Gemini model that underpins at least this initial new era of Siri. The kind of pre-recorded, polished keynote is underway, but IRL, Tim Cook took to the stage. He was welcomed onto the stage by software chief Craig Federighi. It will be his last as CEO. September 1st, he becomes executive chair, but his 15th all told, and an important moment of transition for the company. But Siri needs to work.
Well, and does a standalone Siri app, Ed, drive people to buy more iPhones?
Yeah, I wrote about this for the Tech in Depth this morning. No is the short answer. Most forecasters see a contraction on a unit basis in the smartphone market this year, although on a dollar basis growing, of course, because of higher prices, input cost, memory being the principal issue. And it's actually Android weakness, not iOS weakness, that's weighing on smartphones in aggregate. But longer term, there's definitely this educational piece, which is, do I need the latest generation iPhone to get the most out of whatever the new AI capabilities Apple unveils today are? And longer term, going into 2028, 2029, all of the market participants I speak to say, yes, that will become a defining feature. Like, right now Siri is, hey Siri, phone Kailey Leinz for me, and it will do it. Great. But what if it was much more than that? It was more integrated, not in just my iPhone on iOS, but macOS as well. You and I could set meetings, share notes, do something of more substance like we can do today with some of the other tools. That really is the test.
Well, that's going to be a big test for John Turnus as well. Will it be up to him to implement whatever's rolled out today?
Yeah, again, so this started with an in real life appearance from Tim Cook, standing ovation, applause. But I think that there has been a lot of fanfare literally in this 24-hour period around John Turnus. Everyone wanted to have a photograph with him. And there is an expectation that even though he's a hardware guy, Apple is in the business of selling devices. So to answer Kailey's previous question, in the context of John Turnus, there's a great belief that he will get it right, that if they do nail Siri, in the end, it will be a big driver of device sales. That's the whole point.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ledlow live in Cupertino for us. We'll be checking in with Ed later on this hour as we get more headlines out of the keynote address at this year's WWDC. Thank you so much.
Do you talk to Siri?
I don't talk to Siri that much.
I don't talk to Siri either. But this would presumably mean that we will.
When I talk to Siri, it's not on my phone. We have like an Apple HomePod in the kitchen, and it helps me turn the kitchen lights on and off and that kind of thing.
So imagine if Siri could do more than that, I guess, is the prospect today. We'll find out together here. We'll get back with that as soon as we can.
Yes, but first we also need to go to the White House, as there's plenty of news on that front to digest as well. As we mentioned, Israel and Iran have stopped firing at each other for now. We'll see how long that holds. It does, though, seem that is really the desire and the outcome that President Trump has pushed for, as he's continually pushing for a deal with Iran, though the U.S. is still obviously maintaining its naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This is all things that he discussed in a Meet the Press interview with Kristen Welker, recorded on Friday, aired yesterday. Listen to what the president said.
We have the ultimate blockade. I don't consider that a war. My red line would be if I think I wasn't going to make a deal, or if I wasn't going to make a deal fast enough. So we're having very good negotiations with the people that are leading the country now. We'll either have something done fairly quickly, or we'll finish it out militarily.
So for more, we go to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent, live at the White House. So, Tyler, I guess it becomes a question of fairly quickly. The president was pressed on the timeline, and he continually pointed back to wars of the past that lasted years. So where are we now a few months in?
Well, Kailey, at this point, we got a lot of fast-moving developments and headlines earlier this morning after what was considered to be the largest flare-up in fighting overnight since the ceasefire was announced back in April. This White House maintains that diplomacy is still a viable option and that they are making progress in the talks. We did hear from Pakistan's foreign minister earlier today urging all sides to come to the table and negotiate. Pakistan, of course, a key mediator in this conflict. And we did get some movement in the right direction earlier today. As you mentioned, President Trump out with a flurry of posts on Truth Social urging an end to the hostilities and that there would be an imminent ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Shortly after, both sides did confirm that they will stop firing at each other, at least for now, because the IRGC came out with a statement saying that the ceasefire will only hold if Israel stops its operation against the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah in Lebanon. But then we heard from Israeli media essentially saying that Israel at this point doesn't have plans to stop that specific front in this war, which both Israel and the U.S. have said is a totally separate operation. But Joe and Kailey, as you both know, it does risk derailing the U.S.-Iran talks because Iran has now maintained that a ceasefire needs to extend to Lebanon. It is an interesting development in all of this, considering that just last week the U.S. did help to broker a truce between Israel and Lebanon, but ultimately those terms were rejected by the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah.
Tyler, thank you so much. Live from the White House, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, as we add the voice of Heather Conley. With the American Enterprise Institute, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs in the George W. Bush administration. Heather, it's great to have you back. Thank you for joining us. I don't know how long we can keep this back and forth kind of whiplash.
Lather, and repeat.
It's been incredible to see it unfold even within the pre-market hours this morning, to go from the depths to now stocks moving higher on hopes for peace. The president's post on Truth Social, 5:36 a.m. Israel and Iran must immediately stop shooting, in quotation marks. He signed it, President Donald J. Trump. Is that why they stopped?
Well, no. I mean, Iran needed to, I think, exert itself here. As we've talked about, the negotiations now have been stuck for weeks. And in some ways, Iran needs to help move that impasse. And Lebanon is the perfect connectivity for them to do it. So they don't want a sustained conflict. They want to demonstrate that they can continue to have ballistic missiles hit the region, that their demands need to be respected. And by linking Lebanon with the conflict in Iran, it places Israel in a terrible predicament. And that predicament really increases the tensions between the United States and Israel, which is not good for both countries. So they're playing a very crafty game, and the president, using social media to say stop, these two have vested interests in continuing. That's the problem.
Well, and it's not just on social media. The president also has suggested in interviews, including one over the weekend with the Financial Times, that he's in charge here, not Israel, and yet Israel still retaliated against Iran. How willing do you think Benjamin Netanyahu how willing is he to go against the wishes of President Trump?
So Prime Minister Netanyahu has a terrible line to walk here. He has to defend and protect Israel from missiles that coming from Hezbollah, from Iran, from the Houthis we saw. And as he does that, again, this is why when the Iranians linked Lebanon to resolution of this conflict, they widened it. I think he will craft this very careful line because he knows he needs the United States, he needs their support, but he must take action to defend his country. Please also remember there's a very important election that's going to happen in Israel in October. Public opinion has, this is not going to be a good election for Prime Minister Netanyahu, and people want some action here, although the Israelis understandably are very tired of this conflict.
Well, enter the Houthis once again, who you just invoked, essentially announcing a ban of Israeli vessels in the Red Sea. Is this the most likely reason why hostilities resume? Would this be a whole new shooting war between Israel and the Houthis?
Well, it's really the card that hasn't been fully played. If you think about Iran could have used this lever with the Houthis very early in the conflict. I think they held it back. Houthis were certainly damaged in the conflict in 2023, 2024. But
reports said, though, we left a lot behind that we did not destroy.
100%. And we weren't effective at eliminating that conflict. So this is really, I think, for Iran, invoking the Houthis Houthis is really a power play with the Gulf states because, as you've seen, the Emiratis, the Saudis have used pipelines to try to get and divert the energy to the Red Sea. If the Iranians can bottle that up through the Houthis and you still have this blockade, it just puts more pressure on the region to try to cede to Iranian demands. So these are all interlinked. Let's see how much. The Iranians have to be careful as well. Egypt is part of this negotiating team. This impacts Egypt terribly economically. So lots of careful balancing acts to come.
Well, and so when we consider the Houthis, or with Hezbollah and Lebanon as well, how much control does Iran have in the decision making? Should we assume that that link between them and proxies that they have funded is that ironclad, where they can say, you know what, leave the Red Sea for now, we'll let you know when it goes? Or could the Houthis still decide to act kind of independent of Tehran's wishes?
Kailey, it's a great question. I mean, we can't give too much credit for the Iranians for full control over this. And I think, in fact, the Houthis were damaged somewhat, and they also don't want to have everything taken away from them. So I think there's some judicious use, but Iran does have enormous sway in support of Hezbollah and Houthis. And as we've seen over the last 48 hours, Iran's ballistic missile program is still quite lethal. It can hit, so it hasn't been degraded as much as we had hoped after the initial conflict in February.
Our Republican strategist Rick Davis suggested in a conversation earlier today that Iran is bracing for the long haul. Do Americans need to start getting that into that mindset? I know the president says we're on the verge of peace every 24 to 48 hours. This could be months. This could be longer. Yeah,
Joe, but the president does such an excellent job of verbalizing, and the markets respond to him. So, right. I mean, that is a huge win for him. You're right. I mean, the reason that I think energy prices are remaining in a reasonable, China has pulled they're not importing. They've stopped. So there's so many different mechanisms here. Iran does have huge economic pressures building on it. The attack on this Indian tanker that just went through Oman, empty tanker, they need storage before they shutter wells. Yes. They're under pressure, but they see that they now have leverage over the United States in Lebanon to get Israel to stop, certainly in the Strait. And the Iranian elite, I hate to say this, are enjoying using this leverage over the United States. So yes, they think they have time, and they want these economic pressures to build in the region and in the United States so that we will cede to their demands. So I think we'll be back at this conversation quite a bit. We are very, very stuck in this moment.
Well, and because we are stuck in this moment, and this moment is taking up so much oxygen, a lot of us are paying less attention to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But Russia is feeling that economically as well. Bloomberg reported last week that the Russian finance ministry told Vladimir Putin that this is becoming unsustainable financially. Could we see an end to that conflict, some kind of negotiated outcome there before we actually end up with a negotiated outcome in the Middle East?
So I think these both are going to be working on parallel tracks. The senior Ukrainians believe that they can continue to apply what they call long-term sanctions, which are their drones that are just attacking Russian refinery capacity. There's energy, fuel shortages within Russia because they're doing such an effective job that they sense that there could be some movement. Look, the Russian technocrats that have been managing the Russian economy brilliantly over the last 4 years to manage all this, they've run out of tricks. And now the pressure is on Vladimir Putin. But Putin, I don't think, will be dissuaded. He believes he can still achieve these gains. And what he said during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, he's saying that they're winning on the battlefield, although the Ukrainians have now claimed over 600 square kilometers. They're gaining ground slowly. They're hitting Russian supply lines. It will continue to be very dynamic, but I don't see any give right now in Vladimir Putin's view. He thinks he can still keep marching forward at great cost, unfortunately.
All right, Heather Conley, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
Non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you so much. And we want to get a quick check on the markets now as we're seeing this tech rally underway, helping lift broader equities higher. Let's turn to Charlie Pellet for a checkup in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Dip buyers coming back into the market. The Dow, however, does remain lower. Tech-related names are higher right now. Dow Industrials down 11, down 0.1%, down 57 points. S&P 500 index higher by 38. The S&P up 0.5%. But we are seeing NASDAQ surge 1.2%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.8%. And after Friday's rout, semiconductor names are pushing higher. The VIX, the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor stock index up now by 6%. The VIX closing in now on 19. A 10-year at 4.55%. The 2-year 4.15% with a 30-year 5.02%. Gold at 43.47 the ounce, up by about 0.2%. Crude continues to push higher. West Texas Intermediate 91.33 a barrel, up 0.9%. Barrel of Brent right now 94.42, up by 1.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Kailey and Joe, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, looking at the markets as we kick off a new trading week. Thank you so much. Of course, it's a new working week here in Washington as well, after the Senate in the early hours on Friday passed a $70 billion budget reconciliation bill to fund ICE and CBP for 3 years. We now look to the House this week to get a sense as to whether or not this will easily get across the floor in the other chamber. And I'm pleased to say joining us now is the chair of the House Oversight Committee, the Republican Congressman from Kentucky, James Comer, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being with us. Welcome back to Bloomberg. And we do want to talk about the investigation your committee just released into fraud in Minnesota. But if we could begin with reconciliation, what is your understanding of when exactly you will be voting on this package and whether the votes will be there, attendance-wise and, frankly, policy dispute-wise?
I think policy-wise, we're in good shape. Attendance is always an issue when you look and see that the Democrats usually vote in block against anything that President Trump wants. So it's imperative that the Republicans are here because we usually lose Massey on these kinds of votes. But it's my understanding that tomorrow the leadership, the whip office thinks that enough members are going to be here to where we can, in fact, pass what the Senate passed last week on reconciliation. I don't think there are very many major policy disagreements. We all can find fault in these bills, but what I always say about Congress, the biggest problem with Congress is there are too many congressmen. It's very difficult to get 218 votes in the House and then 60 votes in the Senate. But I think we will get 218 this week.
Yeah, the math is kind of sticky, Mr. Chairman. Thanks again for joining us today on Bloomberg. You mentioned Tom Massey. There's also Brian Fitzpatrick, who's voicing concern still about this anti-weaponization fund that the president says he prefers. He said he'd be disappointed if it did not see its own creation. How many members does he speak for, or is the congressman from Pennsylvania on an island inside your conference?
No, there's a lot of heartburn over that weaponization fund. I don't think that there are many Republicans that dispute that the government has been weaponized. I don't think there are many of us that dispute that there are people who are victims of weaponization that probably deserve some type of compensation. But there were just so many question marks about how it was created, where the funding came from, who was going to determine who received compensation and who didn't. It was just not something that I think was rolled out very well. So I'm pretty confident that's not going to be a part of any legislation moving forward anytime soon.
Do you support the idea, Congressman? Or it depends on how it's made up?
Well, I have a lot of questions. So right now I'll hold off any support or anything like that. I have a lot of questions, but you can look at my interviews over the past 3 years. I don't think there's anyone that has been more critical of a weaponized government than I have. There are instance after instance where I've given interviews on national TV complaining about the Department of Justice or some other government agency, usually in the intelligence community, that has weaponized or abused their office. So I do believe that that's a problem. It's just a matter of how you create a fund. I think that needs to be debated in Congress. I think it needs to be transparent. And I think we need to be crystal clear on who will be the decision makers on who receives any type of compensation in the future.
Got it.
Well, and to your point on your concern about intelligence being weaponized, Mr. Chairman, that's why you have expressed some criticism of FISA, specifically Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, warning that it can be abused, that there potentially is risk to civil liberties. That, of course, is a live question this week as those authorities are set to expire on Friday. We are seeing in the Senate that being held up by the president's tapping of Bill Pulte as the acting director of national intelligence. Knowing, Mr. Chairman, he is someone that used non-public mortgage data to go after perceived enemies of the president. Are you concerned that those abuses could happen as he's helming DNI?
I think there's always going to be a concern that abuses can happen throughout history, regardless of which party's in power. There have always been instances where no-name bureaucrats, we often call them deep state bureaucrats, abuse their power. So, yes, I'm always concerned about that. I don't know this particular nominee. That's something the Senate decides, not the House. So I don't really have a say in that. So, I haven't put a lot of thought into that. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's a good reason not to vote to extend FISA. I would prefer warrants. I believe that's something that's very important. Warrants for Americans. I know that's something that we fought for in the House, but at the end of the day, I do have confidence in Kash Patel and John Radcliffe and a lot of the guys that are leading our intelligence agencies right now to do the right thing. And we've got a lot of bad actors in the world, whether you're talking about people from China or talking about people from Iran. There are hot spots all over Russia. There are a lot of people that are, as we speak, trying to do things to disrupt our government, to disrupt our economy, to create havoc. And I think the intelligence community should have all the tools at their disposal to be able to identify and protect Americans.
Sounds like you don't believe that it will expire, Mr. Chairman. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering what would happen if it did.
Well, I think we've already heard from Marco Rubio, who I think is doing a tremendous job as Secretary of State, that this would create a lot of problems for our intelligence agencies that are, as we speak, trying to monitor some of these bad actors. So I hope that it doesn't, but I know there's a lot of concern in both parties about warrants for Americans, as there should be. That's a constitutional right. So hopefully we'll get these resolved, and hopefully we can give our intelligence agencies the tools they need to protect America.
Mr. Chairman, Kailey mentioned the work you're doing on the committee around fraud in Minnesota, and we do want to talk about this because you dropped a more than 200-page investigation here in which you allege the governor, Tim Walz, and the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, allowed fraud to occur. We saw you pull them both before the committee back in March. I believe it was early March. What's the end game here? Will this investigation lead to a piece of legislation?
Yeah, we're going to vote on a lot of bills this week that are going to put more guardrails on federal funds going to states. I think that's one reason you're going to see through J.D. Vance's task force on fraud, through our work on the House Oversight Committee, you're going to see just many, many people, hopefully, get indicted and prosecuted for welfare fraud in lots of different areas, Medicaid especially. One reason is because this is federal money that's sent to the states. And I think if the states if it was 100% state money, I think they would stay on top of the fraud a little bit better. But because it's federal money, and they don't want to do anything to disrupt the money, if you say, oh, we've got all this fraud here, that might trigger what we're seeing now in Minnesota, where President Trump put the brakes on certain different types of Medicaid funding into Minnesota until they get the fraud under control. So what our investigation did, we had whistleblowers come in who were predominantly Democrat career state employees in Minnesota that have been saying this fraud's been taking place for years, and they had under oath told us that they had warned Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison, and they didn't want to do anything about it. And I think that's criminal. I think that's something that every hardworking taxpaying American is sick and tired of, sending money to Washington and their hard-earned paycheck, and then seeing it lost to fraud and fraudsters. There's always going to be fraud, but to know about it, to have these state employees blow the whistle and say there's fraud happening here with this particular program, whether it's the daycare, whether it's the hospice program in California, whether it's the Medicaid fraud in Minnesota.
Okay.
And for the leaders to not do anything, that's what our investigation was focused on. And we had enough testimony and enough evidence, emails, depositions to determine that the governor and attorney general knew about it, yet did nothing about it.
Well, and can you actually quantify it? In the report, you write about an estimated $300 million in federal child nutrition funds and potentially $9 billion in Medicaid-related funds, pulling that estimate from the Department of Justice. Were you able to independently confirm those figures, or are these just estimates?
The 300 million is confirmed, and there were reports when the fraud was being uncovered, media reports that range anywhere from $1 billion to $18 billion. But we are confident it's over $1 billion, which is that's real money in Kentucky. I don't know that it reached 18 billion because I don't think that would have been 100% of every dollar that went to Medicaid, and a lot of the money did reach the people that it was intended to reach, but a lot of it didn't. And that's where we come in. We want to make sure that every penny that is entitled to someone who's truly disabled, who's truly Medicaid eligible, gets their benefits. And what we're seeing is because Medicaid dollars are being wasted by such a large amount in all 50 states, that a lot of programs that are funded by Medicaid are being cut now. And we believe that we could sustain the current levels of Medicaid spending in America if we eliminated fraud. And the only way to eliminate fraud is to hold people accountable for defrauding the government. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're seeing that in Minnesota. There have been over 36 people arrested in Minnesota. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for coming to talk to us today. James Comer is chair of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman from Kentucky. We thank you for the time. As we assemble our political panel now to weigh in on everything that we just heard, we covered a range of topics. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne Zaino and Rick Davis are with us now. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. I want to go back to what we heard from the chairman, Jeanne, about the anti-weaponization fund. Fascinating, as he made very clear that this was toxic. So he didn't use that word, but this was a non-starter for a lot of members not named Brian Fitzpatrick. What did you make of that?
Yeah, if I heard him correctly, I think he said there's a lot of heartburn. And then when you asked him if he would vote, if he would vote against it, he wouldn't rule it out. And I think that is what is so astonishing. Because on the one hand, he said there's lots of examples of weaponization, but they do not feel comfortable with the way this was rolled out. So I thought that was fascinating, that while there's consternation or heartburn, as he said, they haven't ruled it out. And of course, what we're talking about is a president who basically sued himself, won, and the taxpayers are paying for it on top of a shield by the IRS. So stunning that it would not raise even more heartburn and be immediately codified as a non-starter.
Well, of course, the president suggested in his Meet the Press interview this weekend, Rick, that he still supports the idea of the fund, talked about people's lives who have been ruined, that he knows that Congress would have to act. He'd be disappointed if they didn't do so. But if the chair of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, is suggesting unease around this, is that basically telling you that this would never actually get through Congress if the president were to pursue that?
Yeah, I think that the evidence was the way the administration kind of bent over backwards to try and turn off the heat by saying they weren't prepared to do it at this time. They didn't give it up, but it's only going to get harder and harder, right? I mean, you have a 2-vote margin in the House, and you just heard a committee chair, talk about the fact that he probably might vote against it. You've probably got 25 other guys who have a lot more reason to vote against it than he does, and I think they'd be lining up to do so. So the House is just a non-starter if the administration tried to implement this, because they would actively go out and have legislation to deny it. And then the Senate's presented with a different issue. Not let's include an opposition to it in a clean bill, but let's actually deal with this House bill that now says we're going to ban it. And I think you'd see a lot of people coming out of the woodwork in the Senate to vote for that bill, do something offensive rather than defensive. So really, yeah, but this Congress is all but done. and who knows what the makeup of it's going to look like after the midterm elections.
Do they have the votes for reconciliation today, Rick, with this anti-weaponization fund in mind? And by extension, FISA, it's kind of the same conversation. Is Bill Pulte going to create enough heartburn to keep FISA from being renewed?
Well, I was really impressed that the chairman didn't seem to think there was a problem getting FISA done, except it expires on Friday.
Something?
And there's no vote planned. That's pretty cavalier for an important piece of legislation like that actually has been kicked and kicked and kicked down the road. My guess is they may kick it down the road again, and some kind of a short-term fix. Don't have to deal with any of the opposition. There's a lot of it in the House Conservative Caucus. You know, they want warrants for this kind of thing. They want to attach other things to it. So my guess is the most we can hope for right now is just some kind of an extension that can whip through the House and Senate. On reconciliation, it's clean now. But as you point out, I mean, 2 votes and you've already got people grumbling. There are 16 House members who are retiring from the House of Representatives and not seeking future office. Every one of those could be a vote against reconciliation.
Wow.
It's a lot of YOLO members. We talk about them in the Senate, but as Rick points out, there's a lot in the House. Just on this FISA issue, Jeanne, even if we were to see a short-term extension, it becomes a question of what will unlock the long-term nod from Democrats so long as Bill Pulte is still in there as acting director of national intelligence. Is it going to take the administration nominating someone for the full-time position before any Democrat is going to cast a vote to extend FISA powers?
Yeah, I don't know about any Democrat. I think we could see like a Fetterman.
Okay, maybe
or
not John Fetterman.
Exactly. But I do think for the most part that is absolutely the case at this point, that Democrats feel, and I think some Republicans feel, like the president is keen on dismantling FISA. Why else would he have nominated Bill Pulte and then talked openly about the fact that we're going to get rid of some of the dead wood and so on and so forth? So for people who are serious about protecting the nation's intelligence community and who feel at a time of war and when FIFA coming and all of these threats, that we need this FISA to be renewed, and you know, why he threw the monkey wrench of Bill Pulte in just says to people he's not serious about this renewal. And so I do think they're going to wait and see, does he pull Pulte down, or does he in fact nominate somebody else who at least has some experience in intelligence?
The president talked a lot about the anti-weaponization fund in his interview with Meet the Press, which then devolved into a back and forth once again about election integrity. The president restating on a program that aired in June of 2026 that the 2020 election was rigged. He went even further to say that the primary in California just last week was also rigged. Then the back and forth with the host, Kristen Welker, began until the president literally pulled off the mic and walked out. This is what happened on Meet the Press.
Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC, and CBS, and CNN. But Mr. President, you're one-sided crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits, because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the rain with you.
I know.
I've sat in the rain with you for an hour, on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press, because you know what? A country can never be great with a dishonest
press. Listen, we traveled all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
When the president said that last week's California primary was rigged along with 2020, Welker said there was no evidence. He said, all I have to do is look. Rick, if we're still having this debate this many years later, and the president is expressing anger on the level that he did on a Sunday morning program, what does that tell you about the way he's looking at the midterm election cycle and the primary campaign we're still in?
Yeah, first of all, I got to say, the idea that somehow you traveled all the way to Wisconsin is somehow a compelling reason to continue an interview is like baffling to me. Wouldn't she walk there? I mean, what is that all about? Yeah, but look, I mean, we know the president has had a lot of anxiety about these elections, and he may or may not have any ability to articulate what he really thinks. There are a lot of conservative Republicans who don't like the way California administers its elections. Same-day registration, there's harvesting of ballots. There's all these kinds of things. They can't count very quickly. And you would think a country with a state with the resources that California has would actually be able to implement its election process better than this. That being said, it is an old harp that he likes to play. And frankly, I think most of the voting public have just already come to the conclusion that he's wrong on this, and they tune him out when he starts to say these things.
Well, when it comes to California specifically, when Kristen Welker pointed out to the president that Republicans were doing well, the president said, effectively paraphrasing him, not as more votes come in. And that is indeed the case in the LA mayor's race. Jeanne, Spencer Pratt looked like he was going to advance to the runoff. That is not to be. Now it's going to be another Democrat going against the incumbent, Karen Bass. But the fact that he came close, what does that tell us about the politics of the moment, and specifically the populism of the moment?
Yeah, no reprisal of the hills, Kailey. It's over for Spencer Pratt. And by the way, I would say Kristen Welker did sit in the rain. That was very loud rain. So I give her props on that with the president.
They had a roof.
They had a metal roof. Go figure. But I do think it says that people are very unhappy, and the leadership out there has been very frustrating. Now, in a state like California, in a place like LA, you'd have to do a lot more work than Spencer Pratt was able to do in a short period of time. But I think it is just indicative of how unhappy people are. And I would just say, let's not forget, Donald Trump's very open about his attacks on the press. He says his strategy is to attack the press because then when they say things, people don't believe them. And that is, of course, a concern for anybody who cares about democracy, because the facts are clear that there was no stealing of the 2020 election. So we should be very, very clear about that, as much as he wants to pull off his mic and run away from the pounding rain.
All right, Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our Bloomberg politics contributors, thank you so much. Now, as we were talking with Rick and Jeanne, a red headline did just cross the terminal that President Trump's $100,000 fee for H-1B visas has been thrown out by a federal judge, a U.S. district judge in Massachusetts, who called it an unlawful tax that must be vacated. That would be a win for big U.S. technology companies who rely on H-1B visas for a lot of their skilled foreign workers. Of course, the president and the administration is likely to appeal that. But speaking of big technology companies, it's one that is in focus today, specifically Apple, out in Cupertino, where this year's Worldwide Developers Conference is underway. It's all about AI and Siri, and that keynote address is going on as we speak. So let's check back in with Bloomberg Tech co-host Ed Ludlow, who is out there in Cupertino for us. Ed, what are we hearing?
Yeah, we got confirmation of a new generation of Siri AI, and Siri is a standalone app. And if you guys bring the stock ticker up, really interesting. We got both buy the news and sell the news within minutes, right? So the moment Siri AI is confirmed, the stock shoots up to a session high, 2.7%. I think we've come off that now back towards session low, 1.4%. But it was spot on, basically, in line with what Bloomberg's been reporting. Much higher levels of capability and functionality. Siri is a much more useful assistant, and what's happening right now is Mike Rockwell, one of the VPs at Apple, is kind of demoing use case after use case after use case. But the confirmation part is that there is a standalone Siri app, and that Siri is capable of doing so much more than the "Hey Siri, phone Kailey" lines.
Yeah, Apple shares up about 1.2% now. Ed Ludlow. And you know what's also lower is Alphabet. Google's down about 1%, even though Apple's going to be using Gemini here as the foundation of its AI. Is that because this was already baked in, or because Google is simply replacing its business that it already had with Safari? What do you make of it?
Well, again, that would enter the sort of buy the rumor, sell the news trade. Okay. Other than I'd note Alphabet was significantly lower for much of the session anyway. But yes, Gemini is underpinning both the on-device and overall foundation model that Apple's relying on, running on both device and in secure cloud. And that is an important breakthrough, as Apple had framed it, in them being able to make Siri more useful.
Well, so when we consider the usefulness of Siri and the way in which that drives demand, we got into this earlier, Ed, how much this can kind of drive an upgrade cycle. Do we have any sense as to how expensive these new products with this more highly powered standalone app of Siri will be? Like, what's the cost association to the consumer, knowing obviously the AI development in itself is going to be a higher cost for these companies?
Yeah, it's probably the bit that has not yet been said, which is Siri AI, how reliant or literally tied to the latest iOS and also latest hardware is it? One of the things that Apple was stressing earlier in the presentation is that the new generation of iOS 27, is available and applicable to many prior generations of handset, and that got a great cheer in the room. But always the honest answer, we don't know yet if there's going to be but by the way, in order to unlock Siri AI's full potential, you have to have the absolute cutting edge and latest generation of handset. That's an interesting point of view. But again, if it does drive an upgrade cycle, that's not happening in this calendar year, probably not next year either. You know, it's into 2028 when most of the industry sees the consumer waking up to how much AI they can actually use on device.
Apple shares now up only 1%, just about $310 as the Dow Industrial Average turns negative. The NASDAQ is up about 1% as well. Ed, thanks for being there. We need Ed Ludlow on that wall in Cupertino, and we'll have more as we learn it from the WWDC. Important conversation coming up with Denver Riggleman, the former Republican congressman from Virginia, is running an AI company now. And remembering, of course, that he did intelligence on the January 6th committee, has some pretty strong feelings about the anti-weaponization fund that we've been talking about in Washington today as well, with the likes of James Comer a bit earlier this hour. Before we get to Denver, let's check Wall Street, though. A little bit saggy here at the moment. Charlie Pellet, he's got the latest on the markets from New York. How's it look?
Thank you very much, Joe Mathieu. Indeed, saggy, referring to the Dow, 50,800 where we stand right now. We are lower by 66 points, giving up earlier gains, down now by about 0.1%. S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, all moving higher. Got to begin with the rally in tech names. We are seeing a comeback today. Dip buyers back in the market, with NASDAQ now higher by 281 points, up 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 500 points. That is up 1.8%. Keeping it all in context for us, the S&P up by 0.5%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, it is up now by 6.1%. You recall Friday it was down by roughly 10%. The VIX closing in on 19 again, with the 10-year at 4.55%, the 2-year 4.15%, and the 30-year holding at 5.02%. Spot gold, little changed, up 0.1%, 43.34 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.5%, 91.02 a barrel on WTI. Barrel of Brent 94.23. Brent crude up by 1.2%. Bitcoin up 2.5%, 63,358. American companies are spending more on LGBTQ causes and Pride Month events this June. It is a notable turnaround after years of retreat and anti-DEI backlash. Case in point, MasterCard increasing spending, including paying for about 100 employees and executives to march in Pride events this year. American Eagle Outfitters among companies boosting contributions to various lesbian, gay, transgender, and queer causes, and Levi Strauss donating $100,000 to human rights group Outright International. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, Charlie, thank you, sir. He'll be back at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern, as we kick off Bloomberg Business Week daily with the latest on the markets. Our early rally seems to be running into a bit of a challenge here. As we wait to hear from the House of Representatives on what happens next to the reconciliation bill, the Rules Committee is set to be behind closed doors at this hour to pick up the legislation passed by the Senate and potentially get it to the floor, most likely by tomorrow, where it is expected to pass. This is funding for ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and it's been held up a bit by a debate over the president's anti-weaponization fund that he told Meet the Press just yesterday. It was something that he would be disappointed if it did not see the light of day. Knowing there was a grand debate in the Senate, Kailey, about all of this, and they didn't have the votes. It came down to one vote in an amendment which would have banned such a fund, using taxpayer money to make up I guess, pay damages for people who have been purportedly weaponized by the government. Didn't pass the Senate. It is still a live issue, however, in the House, and a lot of Republicans don't want this.
Yeah, and you have some Republicans, like the Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, Brian Fitzpatrick, willing to actually pursue a codification of the idea that a weaponization fund cannot be put into law. The question, of course, is going to become whether the kind of mass support for it is there. But the chair of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, did suggest to us that there are a lot of Republicans who have, what did he call it, heartburn?
Heartburn on this one,
about this. So
I wonder what Denver thinks about this. We have a lot to discuss with Denver Riggleman, the former Republican congressman from Virginia who did intelligence on the January 6th committee. In Denver, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Of course, I know that you've been traveling literally the world raising money for your company, Rig Technology, which I'd love to hear more about. But as far as this story is concerned, as somebody who knows more about January 6th than most, the idea, maybe you can speak to the mentality that somebody like Brian Fitzpatrick has in publicly crossing the president, knowing what happened that day, the idea of paying people with taxpayer dollars who attacked law enforcement and in many cases served jail time for it. Does it give you heartburn?
Oh, it's much more than heartburn. It's great to be back. I missed you guys. I think Brian is actually sane. I think that's the issue that you have, with other Republicans that are maybe for this weaponization fund. But there's a few things I want to point out. And obviously, you both can ask me any questions. I will answer them. First of all, the number $1.776 billion, 1776 being sort of the rallying cry for QAnon during the stolen election conspiracy theories. And when you're looking at the weaponization fund, I think people have heartburn for two reasons. I think those two reasons are that most of that money will go to Trump donors or recidivist criminals. And that's really what it comes down to, is that this fund is about codifying conspiracy theories. So when you look at, I started this warning, I feel like Cassandra, you're talking about August of 2020, Tom Malinowski and I first submitted the QAnon resolution about that violence could happen based on these type of conspiratorial, this conspiratorial thinking theories. And this downstream effect now is you have Donald Trump and the Welker interview, listening to that when you replayed it, it's sort of stunning. It's much more than heartburn. It's disgust. And it's also this impending fear that the same things we warned about in 2020 with violence in the elections in 2026 and 2028 could come to fruition based on this radicalization path that we're seeing. And I think we have to be very specific and blunt about what we're seeing. It was almost disgusting to me to see people laugh it off or to try to diminish or sane wash what he's saying. What he's saying is that the election was stolen. It's going to be stolen again if he loses. And people that believe this become radicalized, that somehow they have to protect our Constitution by listening to a madman spout lies again. It's just a rehash. And I think that's what scares people. And lastly, I think that it's been institutionalized. You have institutional capture where there is no checks or balances on Trump's craziest thinking. And when you see people like Bill Pulte, Tulsi Gabbard before him, you see the real weaponization is what scares me.
Well, on your point on Bill Pulte, and I ask you this as a former intelligence officer, what's the greater risk, that you have an acting DNI who might be able to use intelligence against certain individuals who are perceived by the president to be enemies of his, or that because Pulte was tapped as acting DNI, FISA Section 702 doesn't get extended and goes dark after Friday?
Gosh, that's fantastic questions. As you know, I actually built FISA packages. I'm happy to talk about this, but I think there's a couple things here. When you have somebody like Bill Pulte, you already had, again, I said I felt like Cassandra, you already had a Trojan horse in Tulsi Gabbard. Bill Pulte continues that. You have somebody that has only ever told anybody what people want to hear. Intelligence, being ODNI, is about truth, facts, and data. When you have somebody like Bill Pulte, who was a Twitter influencer and really a Nepo baby, you have somebody like that that's in charge at 38 years old with no experience, and you have this active appointment for 210 days. What it is, it's an end run. It's an end run around the Senate. The Senate has to identify and choose somebody with significant national security expertise. It's almost as if our institutional credibility is a form of sovereign capital. And once you start giving away that capital and the trust in those institutions, we have a complete breakdown of not only our financial system, but any system of trust with our allies. And I think that's what scares me, right? Bill Pulte is so woefully underqualified. I mean, that would be like, I mean, honestly, a bit like asking me to dunk a basketball, right? It's never going to happen. So that's the issue that we have right now, is that we have people that are unqualified, sycophants, yes men and yes women, that are looking at foreign interference in elections that's going to be made up. And it just continues with that $1.76 billion fund, is that Bill Pulte can now make up foreign interference in elections that could affect some of the executive orders or things that Trump does in the 2026 and 2028 election.
Really remarkable. Institutional credibility is a form of sovereign capital. I'm going to have to think about that. Congressman, were you surprised by James Comer's response to the anti-weaponization fund? He seemed less concerned about FISA, but is clearly turned off here. The president has found the line, it seems, for many in his conference. It was January 6th that did it, huh?
Well, they have to, right? Listen, it's so cynical. Right. And it's almost like a form of weaponized ignorance. When you talk about institutional credibility, you can't have it when facts and data point to something specifically as truth. And you have congressional representatives that are so worried about re-election or polling in their specific districts that they're willing to give up the truth and facts to the American people for their own hide. So they get invited to Mar-a-Lago, or they get invited to parties. It's so you know, and when you look at Brian Fitzpatrick, right, and you look at the bravery of some of this saying, this is ludicrous. It's beyond ludicrous. It's the self-dealing we've seen throughout the Trump administration. And again, I think we have to get to a point where adults are back in the room. But again, our institutional credibility is shot when people like James Comer do what they do.
And finally, Congressman, we just have a minute left here, but you obviously are now running in Rig Technologies, an artificial intelligence company. And I wonder if you feel like this administration is doing enough to create guardrails around it, because you're focused on cyber specifically. How great is that threat? Are we doing enough about it?
Yeah, when you're looking at, you know, I think people need to look at NSPM 11. I think that was just released on June 5th. It was a great question, by the way, and I've read NSPM 11. I think what's interesting is there's some good things there about AI, specifically with China. Now, I would argue we don't know that there's no guardrails for China, but I can actually argue that point, that might be a good point. I think the issue that I have, and it's a great question, is that they're talking about ideological bias in that, and that people can be fired for that. And I think, again, we really have a community or an administration that has no guardrails themselves. I think that's what scares me.
All right, we'll leave it there. Looking forward to having you back soon. Denver Riggleman, the former congressman and now CEO of Rig Technology, thank you for being with us on Balance of Power. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.